And we're back, and we're going to talk about the continuing Californication of Colorado, and this time with regard to what kind of car you drive, with this man, Tim Jackson, from the Colorado Auto Dealers Association. Tim, thanks for coming.
You bet. Glad to be on Devil's Advocate with you, Mike, and it's great to be back.
Thanks. All right. So some people who hear this conversation are going to think that this is nutty, that we're making this up, but this actually happened. So the Trump administration recently undid a waiver for the state of California with regard to some regulations around emissions and mileage for vehicles, right? Now, that shouldn't even necessarily be newsworthy here in Colorado, except that what happens in California now directly affects us here in Colorado. And this is where it gets a little bit weird. But explain to us how this Trump action against California affects us here in Colorado.
Well, it will actually put us back to a national standard, which is something we support, and I think really the entire state of Colorado can support, because the federal government is in charge of vehicle emissions, and that's written into federal law. And the only reason there was ever a separate California standard is California applied for and was granted, and has been granted, a number of waivers to exceed the federal standard for the state of California. I don't think it was ever envisioned that other states would join what I call the California Cartel, the California Cartel that would regulate vehicle emissions state by state around the country. But some have, and actually 10 have on the ZEV, the Zero Emission Vehicle Standard, and 14 now have on the LEV, and that's the Low Emission Vehicle Standard. But back to the point, in September, just last month, the Trump administration revoked the California waivers and said, no more, we're going back to a national standard.
All right, so this is actually, from your perspective, this is good news for Colorado. We're back to a national standard, which is where we were prior to just a couple of years ago when Governor Hickenlooper began a regulatory move towards something called Low Emission Vehicle Standard.
Correct.
Right? LEV.
Correct.
And then last year, Governor Polis continued it with something called the Zero Emission Vehicle Standard, or ZEV. And you're going to have to explain these to us, but essentially, through regulatory fiat, Governor Hickenlooper, followed by Governor Polis, essentially put Colorado's emission standards under the control of a California Air Quality Board. Is that right?
Yes, and it is just that complicated. It is just that complicated.
Wow.
On timeline, it was in 2018 when then Governor Hickenlooper signed an executive order calling on Colorado's Air Quality Control Commission to adopt the California Low Emission Vehicle Standard. And they started on that process in May and ended in August of 2018. Then in November of 2018, Colorado voters elected Jared Polis as our governor, and he took office in the first week in January. And his first executive order did several things, but among those, called on that same Air Quality Control Commission to adopt the Zero Emission Vehicle Standard, California Zero Emission Vehicle Standard for Colorado. That went back out to that Air Quality Control Commission, which is, by the way, appointed by those two. Everybody on there is either appointed by Governor Hickenlooper or appointed by Governor Polis. And both commissions had, or the same commission in both time periods, had an executive order from the governor calling on them to adopt, to cede authority, and that's where it gets really confusing. It's somewhat historical in this nature. It represents the first time in Colorado's history that we've ever ceded authority by a regulatory board, or the state of Colorado, to a regulatory board in another state with no accountability to Colorado citizens.
So basically, these standards, or the rules that we have to follow here in Colorado, are decided not just by a California board, but essentially by the California governor, who would appoint people to that board.
Is
that right?
Yes.
So the two Colorado governors have basically ceded authority of their own office to the California governor.
I think
that guy wields a big stick, man.
Yeah, it really matters who California voters elect as their governor and who he appoints, he or she appoints as the California Air Resources Board. By the way, the acronym for that appropriately is CARB, C-A-R-B. And the CARB board, California Air Resources Board, which is based in Sacramento, appointed by the California governor. And by the way, this is also key to the conversation, I think for your viewers especially, that board in its charter has no authority or responsibility or accountability to measure air quality in places like Denver or Colorado Springs or Aspen or Telluride. They're testing air quality in places like Palm Springs and Long Beach and LA, Sacramento, and San Francisco. So if the air quality is bad there and they increase the standard there, Colorado will have to increase the standard here.
Regardless of what the air quality might be in Colorado.
Regardless of what the air quality might be. And by the way, it should be noted that our air quality is very good here. In fact, there's two types of vehicle emissions. One is the carbon emissions, which those emissions are clear. The climate change or global warming emissions, CO2 emissions, are clear. The only type of vehicle emissions that foul the air are the particle emissions. And those are the brown cloud emitting, ozone enhancing, and asthma inducing emissions. And oh, by the way, those are 99% better on the new cars, everything we sell today. So we've made vast improvements. It's like we've moved from the 1 yard line. I've moved the ball here in our industry from your 1 yard line down to our 1 yard line on the other end of the field. Now, these standards may move it the next half a foot, but it's going to be meaningless, really. And in fact, I think they back the ball up, and here's why. They raise the price on your next new car. And whether or not you may be limited in being able to buy your next new car, if there's a $5,000 increase in the price tag of that car, it will affect a lot of Coloradoans' ability to buy their next new car. And if we price Coloradoans out of their next new car, we've essentially made air quality worse because we've kept them in their older, higher emitting cars.
All right, so we got to talk about this increasing the cost of cars thing.
Sure.
Because in many ways, we already had in Colorado a subsidy for electric vehicles, right? And we still do.
Yes.
This zero emission, this ZEV and the ZEV standard essentially could be called the mandate to go with the subsidy because, and correct me if I'm wrong, the ZEV says that a X number of vehicles have to be zero emission vehicles sold in the state of Colorado. Well, what happens if an auto dealer can't sell enough cars to meet the standard? What do we do?
Well, and the regulation is technically on the automakers who are selling those cars into the dealer. So the dealer is the customer for the automakers. Okay. So it creates an incentive, a disproportionate incentive for the factories, the automakers, to pump cars into Colorado that typically aren't selling very well.
These are electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles and or hybrids, plug-in hybrids, right, and the like. And by the way, we love selling those cars. I can tell you our dealers want to sell whatever consumers want to buy.
Sure.
But the price point on those cars is typically $15,000 to $20,000 more than the price point on a comparable gasoline or diesel car. So they are more money. You talked about the incentive. As you and I have talked about once upon a time in the past, I would call the incentives that the state of Colorado and the federal government places on those electric vehicles as the carrot.
Right.
So we've had the carrot out there for about 10 years. About 10 years. And it helps because that $5,000 and the $7,500 federal incentive is about $12,500 on the hood of a car. But that car may cost, again, $15,000 to $20,000 more. So it helps. But now this is the stick. So if you're not selling enough of these, then you're going to have to price up you're going to have to add on to the price of the next new car that the consumers are buying, which in Colorado, as we all know, pickups, vans, and SUVs, 80% of the vehicles consumers buy in Colorado fall in that light-duty truck category. Pickups, vans, SUVs, especially pickups and SUVs. And the price on those will go up.
All right. And I promise I'm not getting us off track here, but this reminds me of something. So, and we talked about this before the show. Number one selling vehicle in Colorado, or nameplate. Nationwide, F-150. And then other pickup truck lines are up there in the top. People are buying pickups, SUVs, light duty trucks.
Yes.
Right? By far. So Dave Chappelle recently had a Netflix comedy special that was universally panned by the culturally elite critics of arts and entertainment in this country. But the Rotten Tomatoes score, which is how the audiences score that, was 99%. So there is this vast chasm between what you would call the culturally elite critics and the consumers of comedy liked. I see kind of the same, seems like the same thing's going on. That what a certain politicians want people to be driving is dramatically different than what the actually people who are actually spending their own money on vehicles want to drive and are willing to drive. I mean, a big disconnect, yes?
It's a total disconnect, and we've been selling electric cars. Electric cars have been available in Colorado and nationwide for 10 years, and more models every year. And when we say electric cars, we're also talking about plug-in hybrids. So
and they're pretty cool cars, and they're getting better, and they're getting better, and they're getting better, and they have a future. We don't know what that future looks like because markets decide the future of things like this.
Well, the consumers will decide, exactly. Consumers are the market. So we've been selling them for 10 years, and we've got those up to, at the end of 2018, a whopping 2.7% of total sales. Now, in that executive order from the governor in early January, it calls on the state of Colorado to have 960,000 cars, electric, that's key here, electric cars on Colorado roads by 2030. Now, how big of a jump is this? I had the chance to talk to Governor Polis at an event down in Lamar, Colorado at Pedal the Plains. I said, your goal, Governor, of 960,000 cars, that's going to be a big challenge for us, him and us, as dealers to get Coloradoans on the road with. Why? If you take the number of vehicles that are sold in a good year, in the best years, it's about 200,000. In the worst years, about 100,000. So we need 10 best years, and then we've got to move from 2.7% of the market to 50% of the market for the next 10 years.
That's a big push.
That's a push, isn't it?
That's a big push. All right, so
we better increase those incentives.
I was going to say you need them, but you're going to need more carrots, I think, is what's going to need to happen. So this is all moot. This point's moot now. The Trump administration has removed California's waiver. Everything's good. We're back to the national standard. So we can all just go along our merry way, right? This is over.
Oh, so it would seem.
All right.
State of Colorado, and I think the other 14 states that have adopted on LEV and the 10 or so that have adopted on ZEV, they are continuing forward with their rules and their advocacy for adopting those rules. It would seem to us that you would set those aside because they're not legal right now. It's basically the state operating illegally.
So I assume, and I was being...
Would you agree?
Well, yeah, it sounds like it, and I was being a little facetious when I said it's all over and we can all go back to normal, but I assume that there's going to be, that now this moves into the courts, that there's going to be lawsuits over this, and I assume that you all have a position on this. You would like to see this national standard stand?
Oh, yes.
Does this Trump decision stand?
Well, it's good for absolutely, because it's good for the state of Colorado and nationally. And oh, by the way, for those watching that are interested in improving the environment, if you're interested in the environment, you better hope the national standard reigns, because it continues to get improved year in and year out. It will continue to improve. The Trump administration was about to announce their plans for the national standard, which will be dramatically elevated over the next few years. And so new cars will continue to get cleaner and cleaner and better mileage, whether they're gasoline, diesel, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or electric.
You know, I got to tell you, the most amazing thing about this entire story is that this all happened purely by a regulatory fiat. There was never a bill introduced into the legislature. There was never committee hearings. There was never a debate on the floor. There was never the opportunity to go in front of those hearings and to make your case. This is all done by two Democratic governors, by a commission appointed by Democratic governors.
Those two Democratic governors.
And so it certainly seems like, and I certainly hope that people listening actually believe what we're saying, because to me, frankly, it sounds a little bit nutty. But we're out of time. Tim, thanks very much for coming by, and appreciate the update.
The time always goes so fast when I'm on with you on Devil's Advocate.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Check me out at CompleteColorado.com, and we'll see you next week.